While Allied forces in World War II feared German machine guns for their incredible rate of fire, the Germans themselves trembled at the monstrous power of the American M2 Browning machine gun and its 50 BMG cartridge. It was not for nothing that it earned nicknames on the front such as meat mincer or head opener, but the true story of its impact is much darker, and as you might imagine, the effect of being hit by such a round is even more terrifying. To understand why and how the machine gun that eventually became the M2 emerged, let's go back in time. Already during World War I, it became clear how important effective machine guns were. However, at that time, they generally used the same ammunition as standard infantry rifles. With the appearance of the first wonders of the battlefield, armored planes and tanks, it became clear that something with much more serious firepower was needed. Therefore, General John Pershing personally put forward the requirement for a new heavy machine gun capable of penetrating these targets much more effectively than the existing .30 caliber models. This request was given to America's most famous gun designer, John Browning. He was commissioned to create a machine gun firing a half-inch round with a muzzle velocity exceeding 820 meters per second, a significant jump in characteristics compared to anything he had designed before. He took his reliable M1917 water-cooled machine gun as a base and essentially scaled it up for the new, larger ammunition. The new cartridge itself, designated .50 BMG, or 12.7 × 99 millimeters, was a scaled-up version of the .30-06, specially designed without a rim for smoother feeding, and also took inspiration from the study of the German 13.2 millimeter anti-tank rifle cartridge. The creators did not yet know that they had invented one of the most powerful and enduring cartridges, which would soon find widespread use on the battlefields. After several iterations, the first prototype was ready and entered production as the M1921, a heavy machine gun with water cooling, intended primarily for anti-aircraft purposes. Initial testing was not promising. Infantrymen couldn't use it effectively due to its excessive weight. The water-cooled version alone weighed about 54.4 kilograms, 120 pounds, and the lighter air-cooled version weighed 38 kilograms, with the tripod adding another 20 kilograms. A fully assembled ground setup ranged from 59 to 77 kilograms, 130–170 pounds, without accounting for ammunition, which did not promise a wide future. Moreover, it had substantial recoil, making accurate fire difficult. Early aircraft couldn't carry it either, and for vehicle installation, there were problems with ammunition feeding, which was only possible from the left side. Initially, the only real use remained coastal anti-aircraft defense. Thoughtful, but no one could imagine how soon everything would change. John Browning passed away in 1926, but work on his design continued, and the structure was refined. Changes were made to the internal mechanisms, allowing the feed side, left to right, to be quickly changed by replacing the top cover. A universal receiver was developed, onto which either a water-cooled, heavy air-cooled, or light air-cooled barrel could be mounted. This concept began to look promising, and after a series of other improvements, the machine gun received the designation M2 Browning. During this time, other nations were switching to larger calibers, such as 20 or 30 millimeter cannons. However, the Americans believed that the high muzzle velocity and adaptability of the 50 caliber cartridge would still ensure its effectiveness. It remained in production, and its true power was about to be revealed with the onset of a new global conflict. Thus, the M2 transformed into the legendary Deuce, or simply the 50, as soldiers would soon call it. The nickname Deuce was coined from the words mother and deuce, meaning two, alluding to its status as a sort of mother of machine guns. And this turned out to be quite close to the truth. With the outbreak of World War II, the U.S. already had M2s serving in a wide variety of roles. On fixed aircraft mounts, as anti-aircraft guns on ships, bombers, or vehicles, and of course, on tripods for infantry use. The primary early use was in aviation, where with lighter barrels and a tuned-up rate of fire, from 500 to 1,200 rounds per minute, it nearly matched the German MG-42's rate of fire, although it was intended for short bursts. This was critically important, as the gunner had only a short time window to hit a fast-moving target. In some configurations, the sheer number of M2s was unimaginable. For instance, the well-known B-17 Flying Fortress Model G bomber carried up to 13 of these machine guns in various twin mounts. The P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bomber had 8 M2s, 4 in each wing. But the Douglas A-26 Invader took this to a new level, mounting, get this, up to 18 M2s, 8 in the nose, 4 in each wing, and 2 in the turret. The machine gun provided a perfect balance between rate of fire and single-shot power, easily penetrating the engine blocks of enemy fighters, especially with armor-piercing rounds. And with several of them firing at once, it became deadly to anything on the ground, even shredding the thinner roof armor of tanks. Soon, the heavy barrel variant became an essential feature on almost all tanks and vehicles. By 1945, millions of M2s had been produced, making it the most mass-produced machine gun in history. The Germans were frustrated by the ubiquity of American heavy machine guns on the battlefield. This made any attack by low-flying aircraft or dive bombers like the Stuka extremely risky, as a 50 was mounted on virtually every jeep, half-track, and tank. This is why on tanks, the M2 was mounted on the rear of the turret. This allowed it to fire upward in case of an air attack, although the gunner was thereby positioned outside the relative safety of his armored vehicle. Before we move on to the battles, let's explain how the M2 works, in case you ever wondered why its barrel moves back after firing. The M2 operates on the short recoil principle. The barrel and bolt are initially locked together and move rearward as a single unit after firing. This ensures that the cartridge case remains firmly supported in the chamber while gas pressure is still very high, preventing its rupture. After traveling back about 10 millimeters, the barrel stops, and the bolt continues its movement independently, extracting and ejecting the spent case. As it moves, it compresses the recoil spring, which pushes it forward, stripping a new round from the belt, chambering it, and firing again. The process repeats as long as the trigger is pressed. Let's turn to how German soldiers viewed the M2 and why they hated it so much. The first and most obvious reason was the American reliance on overwhelming firepower as a primary tactic. The Germans were terrified by this. The U.S. did not suffer from ammunition shortages like the Wehrmacht. It seemed that every piece of American equipment on wheels or wings carried at least one heavy machine gun. Being hit by a 50 is incomparable to smaller calibers, and the M2 also significantly outranged lighter machine guns. Compare the 8mm Mauser cartridge fired by the MG-42 with the 50 BMG. The latter delivers 5 to 10 times more kinetic energy to the target. If you were fighting from a building, concrete or brick walls no longer offered protection, as the rounds would either penetrate them, killing you, or, if not immediately, a concentrated long burst would completely destroy the wall section or shred your sandbag bunker. Even better armored tanks like the Panzer IV, when hit by heavy 50 caliber fire, could let rounds slip through, especially in the sides or rear, not to mention having their optics and tracks damaged or the turret jammed. Lightly armored Japanese tanks in the Pacific Theater were easily destroyed by the M2, particularly during banzai charges. There is one controversial point regarding the 50 BMG in World War II: the myth that it was supposedly banned by the Geneva Conventions because of its devastating effect on the human body. This was indeed a myth, but the effect on the body was, unfortunately, not exaggerated. Essentially, A hit by a 50 BMG round to any part of the body will 100% lead to the amputation of that part, if survival is possible without it, or to death. Many German soldiers, sadly, witnessed this. The energy that the 50 BMG transfers to a living organism creates an effect so gruesome due to hydrostatic shock that we cannot describe it in detail here. But as you likely understand, if it can do that to a concrete wall or, say, a watermelon, imagine what it does to a human. Now you understand the concern of the German soldiers. They had to adapt their tactics to counter American heavy machine gun positions, shifting from direct assaults to taking them out with snipers, tanks, or indirect fire using mortars and artillery. Remarkably, the Germans had nothing similar. Their heavy machine gun was the MG-42, or MG-34 when mounted on the Lafette tripod, which was considered the heavy machine gun configuration. And while the Lafette tripod was truly ingenious, providing German machine guns with high accuracy and greater range, the 8mm Mauser round had none of the punching power of the 50 BMG. The closest analog to the M2 was their 13mm machine gun, the MG-131, but it was used only on fighter aircraft. The Germans even planned to use captured M2s mounted on U-boat conning towers as anti-aircraft weapons when they had to surface to charge batteries, and even produced copies of 50 BMG rounds for this purpose, which demonstrates their respect for the weapon, although actual use was rare. Before we move on to some terrifying modifications of the M2, let's look at the types of ammunition it fires. The standard was the ball round, with a full metal jacket and serious destructive force, of course. But there were also specialized and exotic variants that enhanced its effectiveness. Firstly, there are various versions of armor-piercing rounds, capable of penetrating about 25 millimeters of hardened steel. Next are incendiary rounds, designed to ignite flammable material. There are also armor-piercing incendiary, API, and armor-piercing incendiary tracer, APIT, rounds, which add a tracer element for fire correction at long ranges, as .50 BMG bullets are effective even at distances exceeding 2 kilometers. Belts for the M2 were usually loaded with a combination of rounds, with a tracer every 5th round for standard ground use. After the war, interesting rounds were developed, such as the multi-purpose Raufoss round, tungsten core plus explosive, incendiary, which acts like a 20mm shell in a .50 BMG casing, as well as the SLAP, saboted light armor penetrator, which works on the principle of subcaliber rounds used by tanks. It contains a small tungsten penetrator, providing significantly better armor penetration. Oh, and by the way, since we mentioned sniper rifles, the .50 BMG cartridge so impressed the American military with its accuracy that they built a sniper rifle around it. The most famous example is the legendary Vietnam War sniper Carlos Hathcock, who experimented with the M2 machine gun, mounting a telescopic sight on it to engage targets with single shots at long ranges. This inspired the creation of the famous M82 Barrett rifle, the so-called anti-material sniper rifle chambered in .50 BMG. This video about the 50 would be incomplete without mentioning the Quad 50. When one heavy machine gun is not enough, you simply take 4 of them and mount them on a single platform, pointing it at anything you wish to cease to exist. We are talking about the M45 Maxon quad mount. It was initially created for mobile defense against low-flying aircraft. The .50 BMG was good for shooting down planes, but the problem was its relatively low rate of fire. Therefore, the firepower was multiplied by 4. The mount could now fire up to 40 rounds per second. The Germans had a similar but more powerful concept with their quad 20mm anti-aircraft cannons, whereas the Quad 50 was simpler and more versatile. The electrically operated turret could quickly traverse horizontally and elevate up to 90 mg. It wasn't long before it was also used against ground targets, as the effect of 4 M2s firing at a single spot was simply devastating. The Quad 50 survived the war and saw combat in the Korean and Vietnam Wars, even being creatively mounted on trucks to protect convoys from ambushes. As for the 50 gunners from World War II to this day, they have serious firepower in their hands, but it always came at a cost. The enemy would do anything to eliminate them as quickly as possible. They quickly attracted the attention of opponents with their distinctive sound, smoke, and muzzle flashes. For a long time, heavy machine gunners did not have armored shields to protect them from enemy small arms fire. Shields became standard much later, during the Vietnam War, and even Humvees in more modern conflicts lacked protection. This led to the development of turrets, and later remote weapon stations like the CRWS. Now, instead of sticking their head and upper body out to fire the machine gun, the gunner fires with a joystick and camera from the safety of their vehicle, using advanced technologies such as a laser rangefinder and thermal imaging. Regarding the M2 Browning, it is fascinating how far it has come from a weapon that initially did not look so promising. So far, in fact, that it is still actively used today with only minor changes and improvements, but with the same core design that is over a century old. The most noticeable recent change was the M2A1 configuration with an improved barrel change system, flash suppressor, and manual safety. Studying the Deuce, I realized that it is even older, literally dating back to World War I, and it still remains an incredibly useful platform and caliber, for which no retirement is currently foreseen.